welcome everyone this morning to our featured keynote panel called Econotopias, Imagining Possible Futures Through the Creative Economy, with our speakers Jaromil, Carolyn Woolard, and Ted Howard. And I am very, very excited for this panel. I've been looking forward to this a lot since inviting the three of them to come. I feel that their research practices and projects, the initiatives, the organizations that they're going to talk about really underscore the theme of Econotopias. Caroline Woolard, with being a co-founder of Our Goods, which is an online barter network for cultural production. Jaromil, who is a really well-known contributor to the open source community and is a co-developer of Bitcoin, which is a virtual currency that works on a peer-to-peer distributed network. And Ted Howard, who has been instrumental in creating the Evergreen Cooperatives, which are worker-owned local business community in Cleveland, Ohio. One of the the intersections of all of their practices and projects is the way that they really look at the notion of these terms value and values, which is something that was discussed yesterday by Renee Ridgway, who I know is in the audience, who talked about paid usership, and the way that we, today are really rethinking value, more the commodification of our labor, and values, looking at our ethical and philosophical ways of interacting with each other in our communities. And this is so incredibly important right now as we see more and more of everything becoming increasingly privatized and an extreme inequitable allocation of resources. So what I think will be really interesting is to see how these different alternative platforms are changing the way that we are engaging in production and both looking at different forms of production and cultural production. And they're actually made me feel a lot better. Sort of diffuse the attention over there. Production, distribution, education, and collaboration in thinking how we could create more sustainable, humane societies. And the way that these different economic initiatives put on the table more our social values over profit maximization. So a production model that could be beyond capitalism. So our first speaker, and is Jaromil, who I first met in 2008 at the Singapore ISEA. And I'm very happy to have him back here in the beautiful, enchanted land of Albuquerque. Jaromil is a software developer, theorist, artist, hacktivist, and founder of the Dyn.org network, which is a free software community at the intersection of politics, art, and technology. He's currently pursuing his PhD at the Planetary Collegium EndNode at NABA in Milan, where he's working under the title Libra Made Flash Generative Patterns for Alternative Economies. He's been instrumental, as I mentioned before, in developing multimedia and streaming applications on the Linux platform, and for those of you that don't know, it's an open source operating system. And he's credited for creating the most elegant fork bomb code ever written, which, if you're a programmer, you could read that on his shirt, write it down. And what that does is it basically makes your entire computer system shut down, like by making these little bombs that kind of fork out. So be sure that you're very nice to him later today so he doesn't attack your computer. And he was going to be talking about this virtual currency that he's been involved in called Bitcoin. So without further ado, let's please give a warm welcome to Jaromil.
Thank you, Stefan. And thank you all for coming here, inviting me here. I'm very honored. It's my second time in the US, and I'm quite enjoying this discovery. I'm talking about also the faults of the financial system and where we are today and what are the problems that afflict us. And in doing that, I could just take a shortcut and tell the story this way, which could be also appropriate. Please note the date on the calendar. There was a macroeconomical prediction on where are banks today, and this is how many people talk about it today. Now, I'm not questioning whether that is valid or not. In fact, Karl Marx wrote about this, what is happening now to banks and the fact we are bailing them out with public money. But I don't think this is leading to a progressive and constructive action today to overcome what we are facing. So what I'm trying to build is definitely a different narrative, although I think that the foundations of analysis that Marx laid down are very useful. This is the outline of what I'm going to show you today, and this is a quote I like to start from. There are two quotes. One is, oh, I'm sorry. Because all the footnotes will appear there. Right there. This is one is from Commonwealth, the last book of Negri and Hart, and the second one is from Bernard Litter, that is advocating, is one of the people that actually envisioned the fiscal union in Europe, and is advocating the use of complementary currencies and credit circuits to actually reactivate economy. Bernard Litter puts a lot of hope into the open source community and especially the models of trust that we developed, although he's not endorsing Bitcoin, and I think his criticism can be pretty constructive on that. Although, now let's go on Bitcoin and try to understand what it is. I will propose you first an historical perspective on it, and that's the starting point, I guess. This is a painting that has the representation of this like friar. He wrote a book back in Venice in 1495 that is the first trace of the double book accounting system, what we use today for accounting. So I would argue accounting is quite a science, although it has never been treated as such, and it's the mechanism that we use to make sure that what comes in and what comes out in business matches, so that there is a matching quantity of business at the end of the year. I guess you're familiar with that. And the taxing system works with this, system that we developed and he outlined since 500 years and more. We never actually innovated this system. Through all these years, there have been several people that found how to hack this system, although we never felt the need, and probably the same people that found how to hack it, they were stakeholders of the systems that were up to enforce. What we are today facing is basically a situation in which the economy and this economical, the way work is handled within our economy is well represented by this mechanical Turk, the image of the person inside a chess player that was first represented in 1769. It was something to entertain the court. It was a machine that was hiding a person inside that could play chess, so that outside you will see a robot, but inside there was a person. The Mechanical Turk is also a service by Amazon that is advertised with the name artificial intelligence, which is basically the use of a human mind to overcome the limit, the temporary limit of artificial intelligence to do a simple task. And often these kind of labor relationships end up in actually making the person disappear. This is another quote from Edgar Allan Poe, a poet and literate that wrote about this machine. The disappearance of the body of humans in biopolitical terms is an extremely dangerous situation. In the moment in which the workers and that work actually inside a machine don't recognize their own presence and their own life into the process of production, it generates frustrations, if not even anger. And I'm not just talking about alienation, what Marx described as alienation, but I'm mostly referring to the fact that what is the medium, what becomes the medium are the humans, and what is then actually the object of the pure instrument is the money. What we have with Mechanical Turk is a situation in which you can pay a certain amount of a national currency from one side of the world, which is changed to enormously lower change rate into another side of the world, and just externalize all the tasks of production to somewhere else, where people will sell their time for an enormously lower amount of money. And in doing so, they might find a novelty, the fact that they are using a computer to earn that little money, but I think that on the longer term, it leads to something that can be defined a form of slavery, especially considering that we are using one national currency as a main reference for change for all the currencies. And considering that however we want to mean well and follow the dream of the World Bank and IMF to actually make poverty disappear, we cannot be aware of the detailed dynamics of the systems that we are interacting with, and how we are actually fostering poverty instead of deleting it. An example of, since I'm referring to the World Bank and IMF, of their good-willing but really bad results is given, for instance, in Asia or Indonesia, more specifically. So where we are today is a situation in which actually a fact that we represent online and we exchange is definitely balancing the change that we have on money, is balancing the value that we have in money. I will reformulate. I became quite emotional in making this speech. I thank you really for this attention that you put. It's, like maybe some things are. I'm also I'm trying to. I'm exploring stories, and some scientists out there, they might argue that stories are just mythology, and that it's very hard to build a discussion in the humanities, although I still think that the humanities provide 2,000 years of histories and reflections that are maybe not based on pure data as someone would worship data, but they are very useful to understand where humans go. Let's keep the moisture intact, I would say. So I'm trying to cross this analysis with a humanistic approach still. And what is the basic radical quantification of the value of money and labor and affection is given by nowadays aggregation systems that actually profile people and abstract and balance what are their preferences and emotions. So after a situation in which we had the demand and the offer to establish actually the value of goods and money, we are now stepping on the next level of abstraction. And probably I leave this discussion open. This is like an attempt to an analysis of what is happening with two quotes, one from Christian Marazzi and the other from Ludwig Wittgenstein, that might outline what is the future of the movements that are trying, the multitude in Spinozian terms, that are trying to actually overcome the impasse in which we are, that we are facing. I think it's an impasse given by the omnipresence of a neoliberist approach, as we call it in Europe at least, that tries to quantify and provide a rationality to all players of a game, but often neglects the actual unquantifiable affections of people, and often also neglects to match the actual grassroots, the actual production, the actual people that invest their biopolitical capital into the production of something, and lays over it a carpet of lies. So, what is Bitcoin in all this?
It is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the first decentralized digital currency. Bitcoins are digital coins you can send through the internet. Compared to other alternatives, Bitcoins have a number of advantages. Bitcoins are transferred directly from person to person via the net without going through a bank or clearinghouse. This means that the fees are much lower. You can use them in every country. Your account cannot be frozen, and there are no prerequisites or arbitrary limits. Let's look at how it works. Bitcoins are generated all over the internet by anybody running a free application called a Bitcoin miner. Mining requires a certain amount of work for each block of coins. This amount is automatically adjusted by the network such that Bitcoins are always created at a predictable and limited rate. Your Bitcoins are stored in your digital wallet, which might look familiar if you use online banking. When you transfer Bitcoins, an electronic signature is added. After a few minutes, the transaction is verified by a miner and permanently and anonymously stored in the network. The Bitcoin software is completely open source, and anybody can review the code. Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing. When everyone has access to a global market, great ideas flourish. Let's look at some examples of how Bitcoins are already used today. You can purchase video games, gifts, books, servers, and alpaca socks. Several currency exchanges exist where you can trade your Bitcoins for dollars, euros, and more. Bitcoins are a great way for small businesses and freelancers to get noticed. It doesn't cost anything to start accepting them. There are no chargebacks or fees, and you'll get additional business from the Bitcoin economy. For your first Bitcoins and more information, visit reusecoins.com.
This was... Oh, I'm sorry, the credits to the video that went out, but We Use Coins is a video that was initially paid by the Bitcoin community in Bitcoins to video makers and designers to actually do this video and explain to the people. So it was one of the first collective gathering of money for the purpose. And it's a short explanation. It has already some problematic points. I'd like to point them out right away. One is the generation of coins, the generation of this money, is done by just running computers. So the proof of work, the idea of a proof of work is basically having machines with fat graphic cards that actually can generate the coins. This was a flaw in my perception of the whole idea, and I started criticizing Bitcoin to the community even before entering the project, because if the proof of work is simply having fat computers that work on it, then there is no point. I mean, the currency is inherently based on a value that is even more abstract and not based on humans. What I understood it was instead, when I looked better into it, is that by running these processes that try to find more Bitcoins, the whole network gets stronger. So basically the authentication system, the fact that every coin is unique, raises the strength as many miners are active. So what we have in front is a huge usage of power by people that are running these computers and trying to generate Bitcoins, but we have to compare this energy with the energy needed to produce a national currency in the classical way. In the classical way, we need to have a building with very thick walls, we need to have a secret procedure inside to actually print paper, and we need armed guards on the perimeter. So that is the energy that gets transformed in the collective action of people networked and trying to actually bypass the physical limitation. And there are many characteristics in Bitcoin that bypass the analog loophole in this way. For instance, to actually get or give Bitcoins, we don't even need, even to get them physical, we don't even need an access on the street. We don't need an ATM. So, what is the impact of Bitcoin? I'd like to outline basically what are the impacts. I forgot the global economy quote that was there. I mean, many of us are probably familiar on the fact that global economy often means exploitation, it means peripheral Fordism, it means colonization of local economies. So that can be a problematic perception, and I'm looking at what Bitcoin can do in a different perspective anyway. Of course, the field is open for studies on what really means. I think one impact is on the grassroots. And we could talk about the grassroots of gaming, for instance, so like gamers that actually do online. But I like to go to the heart of one of the first communities that adopted Bitcoin. And well, basically the people gaming online, also like gamblers, they were pretty upset about the fact that huge companies will be put on top of their passion for gaming. I mean, gambling can be an aesthetic, and also, you know, like they have like a whole aesthetic into it. And they wanted to actually build their own gambling systems online to bypass the big companies that offer the service and need the license and all that. And I think by knowing this community, that what they truly wanted was that the real people that have a passion for what they're doing were involved in providing this service. They weren't looking into bypassing taxes or stuff like that. And this is an instance of grassroots, I believe. The neutrality, of course, Bitcoin was a crucial thing to look at in the moment in which WikiLeaks, the journalistic initiative by Julian Assange, was cut off the network, the financial network, MasterCard, Visa, and all the banks were just denying them to actually receive donations without even a court case. So this was breaking the agreement on the neutrality of a network, which is extremely delicate. And if the financial network is not neutral, although neutrality, I agree, is an asymptote, is not like there won't ever be complete neutrality, but if we break that law, then we cannot, as the hacker community, we cannot trust anymore that network. We cannot run our operations on that network anymore. Migrants are impacted a lot. If you think of how migrants nowadays, how big migrants' economies are around the world, and how they send back home their money, there are two main monopolies into this game. It's MoneyGram and Western Union. And although they say they don't apply a charge for the transactions, they do apply 20% on the change rate, and they make a lot of money with that. The market of actual transactions for migrant economies is going to open radically. And in general, I would say what we have, where we have an impact on is a liquid sovereign. What I call a liquid sovereign is the fact that we can recreate a situation of sovereignty in, by the medium of, by creating a new medium of money. Of course, people is also working on the liturgy, on the alpaca socks myth and all these kind of things. But what is happening is that we have the possibility to draw a self-determined territory where the banks are not influencing, and we are starting to get a standing point on the game. Whereas whatever we do in financial terms, or we build, we will be always bound to national currencies. Now, I think these are mostly the cornerstones, and especially the disintermediation that Bitcoin brings is is a theme for our age. There are a lot of situations in which we can actually identify this process of disintermediation from institutions to networks and from collectives to conspiracies. It's a kind of movement in our time that goes towards decentralization. And I believe that it won't stop here. People in the chaos communication camp, they are calling for the resilient conspiracy, the self-determination of hackers to actually make the infrastructures on which we work resilient so that they are not vulnerable to a single point of failure, to a single attack, to build networks that can actually resist the imposition of powers, centralized powers. These are some of the references that I'm using in this talk. I didn't actually quote all of them. I guess the slides will be online. I will also put them on my website. And that's it. I'll leave it.
Now that our open source friend is finished, we're going to switch to a Mac.
This one?
We're switching to a Mac now.
This one? This one? No, I have it.
No, we got it underneath.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks.
George might be here.
Hmm?
George might be here.
So I'm going to introduce our next speaker as she comes on up. I'm really looking forward to hear Caroline Woolard's talk. I've heard her talk a little bit in Brooklyn, and I hope she gets a little bit of time to run around in New Mexico, although I think you're only here for a day. Caroline is a Brooklyn-based post-media artist exploring civic engagement and communitarianism. Her work is collaborative and also often takes the form of sculptures, websites, workshops, and actually a lot more. She is the co-founder of ourgoods.org and Trade School to Barter Economies for Cultural Producers, and a coordinating member of Solidarity New York City, which is an organization that promotes grassroots economic justice. Caroline's going to be talking a little bit about our goods, but more specifically non-monetary exchanges, and really looking at resource sharing as a paradigm of the 21st century. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you, and please give a warm welcome to Caroline Woolard.
Thanks so much for organizing this. It's really exciting to be here and see so many people in the room. So I'm a co-founder of Our Goods. It's ourgoods.org. You can go on and find out more if you want. And I thought I should introduce you to the whole team. There's 5 people that started Our Goods. Carl Taschen is a computer engineer who's behind Zipcar. Rich Watts is innovating distillation of vodka right now, and he's also a designer and a developer. Jen Abrams is a choreographer and has managed nonprofits for a long time. And Louise Ma is an illustrator and an artist and a designer. So I'm here representing this group. Since I'm used to working in groups, I thought I should make an agenda because it makes me feel like I will respect the time. So first I'll say what Our Goods is really quickly, and then why I'm interested in non-monetary exchange, then some challenges and possibilities for barter, and a potential future where Our Goods would exist in a larger network of resource sharing. So what is Our Goods? Our Goods is a barter network for creative people. We help artists and activists, designers and craftspeople get their projects done without money by trading their skills and spaces and objects. most people in this room have probably done a barter before. This is a way to connect more people in the creative community to do this with each other outside of existing social networks. So you can see what people are listing today and search for fabrication or whatever you're looking for. And then search by people if you want. This guy just joined, and he's looking for help with Occupy Tech Ops. This woman is a motivational speaker, and she's looking for spaces and also pole dancing trainers. So there's a wide range of people here. You'll also notice we ask people to say why they're on the site. She says she really wants to get work done, whereas he's a little bit more towards meeting people, and Tom from Occupy really wanted to meet people. So this guy just joined. I thought I'd feature him because he does stage combat, and I never thought I would be able to collaborate with someone who has, these kinds of skills. So there's a wide range of people on the site. We're based in New York City, so the majority of people are in New York, but there's no reason there couldn't be a network in Albuquerque exchanging with people in New York. There's also boat building, CNC fabrication access. And when you're interested, you just click on the thing, start a dialogue that goes through your email. It's also tracked on the site. And when you're done, you leave feedback. So that's how Our Goods works online. We also do a lot of workshops because we found that we have to build a culture of cooperation and talk about the intentions behind resource sharing so that it's not just about getting a deal. This is something that we did at Creative Time. We often try and make a community notice board for people who participate or visit exhibitions so that the audience can see each other as resources rather than waiting for gatekeepers to validate the importance of specific artists. We also do events with farmers. More and more we're interested in connecting agriculture with culture. So this is a supper that we hold with unsold produce where artists make gifts for farmers in exchange for a meal. And out of Our Goods came this really incredible initiative that is now working on its own as a collective in many places called Trade School. So Trade School is a learning platform that runs on barter. Anyone can teach a class, but you have to ask for goods and services rather than money in exchange for your class. So it's in many places. If you aren't based in New York, it's more likely that you'll find a community of barter that we're related to through tradeschool.coop than through Our Goods. So that's the basics. Now, why would we be interested in exchanging things without money? Some of this might seem obvious, but I think it's good to make visible the motivations that we all have that are not about profit seeking. So I'm really excited about honoring non-monetary motivations. The Community Economies Collective has a really incredible website, and this is one of the diagrams that they made to show this thing that happens over and over again where we validate and reify the importance of the job that we get paid to do. So if you're in a bar and someone says, "What do you do?" and you say, "I'm an artist," usually they'll follow up with something like, "Oh, but what do you really do?" And this is something that helps to make visible all of the things that we do that are incredibly valuable to each other and to society that are not just wage labor produced for a market in a capitalist firm. So I'm going to go through some projects I've made and just call out my motivation so that we can start thinking through all of the reasons that people make things. So this project was about speaking truth to power. This one was about telling untold stories. This one was about refining craftsmanship and understanding our relationship to labor. This one was about demonstrating plausible alternatives and making something beautiful. This was about building community. This one was trying to make history relevant, rethinking the Shakers. This was about taking a risk and questioning routine. And also, I want to call out that I went into the arts because I knew that I would be welcomed in my whole self. And I think it's important to remember that the arts are a place where people can really exist in multiple identities. Sometimes I'm making things just because I think they communicate better than words, or to make something invisible visible. So how can we protect our rights to speak truth to power, to share untold stories, refine our crafts, make beauty, create publics, retell history, take risks, be our whole selves, communicate without words, and spark dialogue for plausible futures? I think that non-monetary exchange and recognizing our collective desire to make these projects happen is one way to do that. But there's a lot of challenges. For example, inequality exists already. There's a lot of distrust and also individualism. So I thought this would apply to a lot of projects. Your tool will not transcend history. Unfortunately, even though we talk about barter not in terms of haggling, but in terms of a voluntary reciprocal exchange of goods and services, ideally for mutual benefit, the problem is that oppression still exists. And when we come into a barter with another person, even if we're aiming for shared power or redistribution, and we're trying to take responsibility for ourselves, what comes out sometimes in the exchange is that we have different values for our work, and it might feel or actually be sexist, racist, or classist. So I think this is one of the key things that people need to address when they think of a model as somehow separate from history. The other huge challenge that people bring up all the time is that barter implies private property. Absolutely. We advocate for gift economies, but we find that typically people want a smaller scale network or a managed commons if they're going to give gifts. So when people are working precariously and on the move all the time, it's helpful to have a barter site where you can enumerate your expectations and be clear about direct reciprocity. Also, we find that people use the tool as they want, so often people do use it just to give gifts. And we hope that our goods can move towards a community currency or some kind of Bitcoin point system, local exchange network that isn't just one-to-one, but we feel that people haven't built trust outside of the federal dollar enough, and so one-to-one is a step towards something that it would be more complex or abstract. So what are the possibilities? This is a quote that inspires me a lot. Action without reflection is blind, and reflection without action is impotent. So for me, our goods is a lot about understanding why you barter and talking about the intention of building more of a cooperative culture between cultural producers so that we're not always competing with each other. And also that reflection without action is impotent. So if we only talk or read or write about alternative economies but never practice them, we won't actually be able to make something better. Because if we, or at least I feel that experience is a criterion of knowledge, you know things because you feel them in your body, then we'll make better alternatives if we actually try things out. So again, that image, and calling out that economies are not just producing goods and services for us, they're also producing us, our subjectivities, and our identity. So the way we meet our needs together is also the way we understand ourselves. Even if an encounter with a stranger is incredibly frightening and there's a lot of room to misstep, it's also a place to understand ourselves as cooperative people who actually believe in helping each other to make things without money. So I used to understand barter as this strange space between cold market transactions and free love gift economies. I think that that is a misconception. It's this duality between gift and market exchange that goes through even anthropology. And it doesn't leave room for the ways that gift giving can be competitive. can actually reinscribe hierarchy and the ways that sometimes a market exchange is actually generous. So at this point, I'm thinking of it as 3 different kinds of exchange or experience, each with their own social norms and duration or time scale. So market, gift, and barter. And Louise Ma made these illustrations to try and articulate what I'm saying. So let's say you're in a market transaction. Typically that'll be organized by capitalism. And you're probably more interested in getting the object, getting a deal, than the social value. But that's not always the case. As you think about the material value, you typically want something very quickly. So something is given, an object or cash, and you get object or cash. It's very fast. Whereas if you're working in a gift economy, what's structuring the situation is social norms. So these are maybe implicit, cultural. There's a lot of ways that you understand what you should do at Thanksgiving, for example. And usually the value of the thing you give is determined by the social space, the people around, and how they will experience it or understand it. It's given, and then it's unclear if there will be reciprocity that's direct. Some people say the reciprocity comes through society or through someone in a closed group that you eventually know will get you back. This is the idea of the shadow of the future, that the future, you can feel the shadow of the future on you, so you know something will happen. The way you behave is the way you'd like someone else to behave. So in barter, what's confusing is that it's you and this other person. There is not a large system like capitalism or social norms to determine the way you treat each other. Obviously, you each have cultural heritage and some sense of expectation because you live in the world, but it's not completely clear whether you'll behave more like a gift or more like the market. You see a person, you start talking to them on our goods, you talk about what you want, and then you get to know them a little more and hopefully get something in exchange. So there's a back and forth that's happening that's very confusing for people. And there's a woman who described this as the musculature of sharing, that we haven't built this, and it's very awkward to go between getting to know someone and actually trying to meet each other's needs. The other thing is that the time frame is not very clear. It's always moving. Most people think barter happens in one moment where 2 goods are exchanged, but that's almost never the case. Typically there's a lot of trust involved because the other person will reciprocate much later. So there are these 3 ways. I'm trying to understand each one and the world that it creates. And one thing to know is that a lot of people have experience more in one than in the other. So for example, if your identity is tied up in making money, you might approach a barter much different with that skill or way of working than someone who's used to not being paid, being more of a gift economy participant. So if you have these 2 people talking to each other, here red is the market and blue is gift giving. Say it's a lawyer trying to talk to someone who's always produced food but never been paid for it. It's a self-provisioner. Maybe we're hoping there's a way that within barter they can use these metrics or systems to think about the value of the work. Maybe they have to talk about how much effort it actually takes to grow food. Maybe they need to talk about how long it'll take them, or how much skill they've developed over time, how much wisdom they have about this thing. Maybe they'll just use the market price and that's how they'll do it. Or maybe they're interested in getting to know each other's friends and family, getting introduced to each other's networks. Or maybe they're interested in mutual aid and they'll define it more by the satisfaction they get by participating in a cooperative culture. But there are many ways to come up with a value for what they're doing. So lastly, I'll say I've been really moved by the idea of the solidarity economy. It's a movement that's much more familiar to people in the global south, also in Montreal and in Mondragon in Spain. So I thought I should call out that actually DIY projects go hand in hand with austerity. So if we don't watch out, we'll make DIY networks while all social welfare collapses, and we'll be congratulating ourselves in the corner without thinking about how we relate to all different people on the planet. So, using the framework of lots of activists in the Global South, I think we have to resist the privatization of everything, reclaim the commons, and produce collaborative options. So, we don't just think about the arts as losing funding. We have to think about the fact that the arts and education and healthcare are all being pressured to shut down and only exist if they can make a profit. Whether that means taking to the streets or lobbying your local politicians, you decide. But if you don't think about what you're doing in relationship to a larger narrative and the grassroots as connected, whether it's sliding scale pricing, cooperative banks, or barter, it'll be too small and it won't actually build power. So maybe it also means starting a reading group, getting more informed. In terms of reclaiming, it could just be public space, or it could be a theater, as they're doing in Rome. Maybe it means getting a building from the city so that you can have long-term radical projects. But in general, if your projects reject global capitalism, greed, and hoarding, if you are worried about the attention deficit disorder pathology that makes us move too fast to actually think deeply, if you're worried about reflexive impotence where knowing something doesn't actually change your behavior, and worker exploitation or infinite consumption on a finite planet, you might consider sharing power and information in your group or working anonymously. You might consider making space for dialogue and slowness in your project. You might want to collaborate with activist allies so that if you make a project that generates a lot of media, you can send those viewers to an activist network that will actually do the long-term work. You could also think of your interns as people that you barter with so that they actually have the power to say what they need in exchange from you. I think often we barter where we feel it's one-sided and we aren't actually allowed to negotiate the terms, or we just say, oh, exposure, oh, I'll learn about something, rather than saying, this is what I need, can you give this to me? If so, I feel that there's a space of mutual respect. And lastly, just to think about the materials we use. Often our artworks end up not even recycled, but in garbage cans. And I think the one thing we know is that we are making our work. We can't be sure about its impact, but we can be sure that we are existing in the process of producing this work all the time. So we can do it more cooperatively and with more sustainable materials. So here's a coin made by Germain Coe that I find very beautiful. It's a promise coin. And our goods exists in this network. So I think we need to resist austerity, think about redistribution of money and resources. We need to reclaim unused space and public space. And we need to create more networked infrastructure to collaborate across disciplines. And through that, we'll make economies of abundance where we recognize that we actually are all valuable. And even if we lose our job, our wage is not our identity. And we actually can do a lot together without money. So to end, Marcel Mauss said, society pays itself in the counterfeit money of its own dreams. And if I try and think of what our dreams or my dreams might be, for our goods, it's shared power and mutual aid. So let's pay ourselves with collective infrastructure. Thanks.
That was great. Our next speaker is Ted Howard, who is the founder and executive director of the Democracy Collaborative at the University of Maryland. The Cooperative is recognized as a national leader in the fast-growing field of community wealth-building strategies and policy development. And since 2010, Ted has been the Stephen Minter Senior Fellow for Social Justice at the Cleveland Foundation, where he's been responsible for developing a comprehensive job creation and wealth-building strategy, which has resulted in the Evergreen Cooperative Initiative. Ted has worked in the nonprofit civil society sector throughout his career, including more than 15 years in international development with NGOs and agencies of the UN system, and his articles have appeared in numerous publications, most recently The Nation, Yes, The Chronicle of Philanthropy, and Shelter Force. I also want to mention that he served for 9 years as chairman of the board of Search for Common Ground, which is the world's largest conflict resolution NGO, and also serves on the board of LIFT, which is a national organization dedicated to engaging young Americans in combating poverty in our nation's urban areas. And last but not least, he was listed as one of the 25 visionaries who are changing the world in the UNA Reader. So please welcome Ted Howard.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. If you're wondering the logic of the order of the presentations, we're going by height. So I'm going to tell you a story about Cleveland, Ohio, in just a minute or two. But what I'd invite you to do is listen to this story and what's occurring there from your own community, where you live. And is there something that's being designed? Because it's really a design challenge that we're facing that might be relevant to where you live. And I think also for those of you not from the United States, there may be aspects of this that are relevant. And certainly, as you'll hear, the inspiration for what's taking place in Cleveland actually didn't come from the United States, it came from abroad. And I'm going to tell you about that. But I'd like to, before turning to Cleveland, just a few introductory remarks. As I was flying in yesterday, I was reading the New York Times, and there's an extraordinary article. The new census data has come out. Every year, the census at this time comes out with new data about poverty and other issues in the United States, and found, for those of you in New York City, where my 2 kids live, in Brooklyn, where all the hip kids live, that the top 1/5, 20%, the top 1/5 of the population of New York City now makes 40 times the income of the bottom 1/5. That's the highest it's ever been since these figures have been calculated. It's really quite an extraordinary number. And the Times article, just to sort of cement it, said this is the greatest inequality of income almost in the entire world, with a few exceptions. And the 2 exceptions they cited were Sierra Leone and Namibia. Now, I've been to Sierra Leone, I've not been to Namibia. I know there's a lot of wisdom to learn from those countries, but I don't think this is something we should be learning about income inequality from these parts of the world. The poverty figures also showed that as of last year, 48 million Americans live below the poverty line. Now, those of you that study these things, as I do, know that the way the United States calculates the poverty line in this country it's kind of very arbitrary. It's a very odd formula that began in the 1960s during the War on Poverty under President Lyndon Johnson. If we were to take the way the rest of the world calculates poverty, in terms of the median income, and then half of the median income and everyone below that would be considered poor, that's how countries all around the world do it, we would find that 100 million Americans live below the poverty line in the richest country in the world that the world has ever seen. So it's extraordinary. And the reason I bring these facts up is one of the things I do is I hang out with democratic theorists. I'm not myself an academic, but democratic theorists, people that study democracy, that think about democracy, and I mean this across the spectrum. So from Marxists who think about it all the way to libertarians and everybody in between are deeply concerned now about the potential for holding together a democratic culture and state with this concentration of wealth inequality that continues to escalate. It becomes a fundamentally democratic, small d democratic situation that's really a huge challenge to this country. One last figure. It has been agreed by the Brookings Institution, liberal sort of democratic think tank, the American Enterprise Institution, a conservative think tank, the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank. They don't agree on anything. They have agreed that 400 people, not corporations, not families, 400 individual people in the United States own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. I work with eminent political economist. Some of you may know his work. His name's Gar Alperovitz. And Gar has done a study of this and has concluded that the wealth concentration pattern in 21st century United States of America, our country, for those of you from the States, maps almost directly to the concentration of wealth holding in feudal Europe. That's an extraordinary situation that we face. So that's by way of background to what I want to talk about. How do we begin to address this issue of poverty and continuing a concentration of wealth? It's a design question for our system. There's no one solution. Solutions like this happen at all levels. But if we want to look at how do we begin in our communities to start to address this, then there's some very interesting models. And one of them is in Mondragon, Spain. And I don't know if any of you have studied the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation and what's taking place in the Basque Country. But it has been the inspiration for what we're doing in Cleveland. And very simply, the story is this. In 1955, a priest and 5 engineering students started the first Mondragon Cooperative. 6 people working together, making little stoves that burn paraffin and the like. They did it because they were really in a difficult situation. They were the poorest part of Spain. General Franco, who was the head of Spain at the time, was the last remaining fascist dictator, literally, not rhetorically fascist, it's literally a fascist, from World War II. So Mussolini was gone, Hitler was gone, but General Franco was still standing strong, and indeed into the mid-1970s. And the Basques had resisted him during the Spanish Civil War, and they had lost. So he was out to basically exterminate them. I talked to an old Basque. I've been there 3 times to Mondragon. I talked to an old Basque, and I said, how bad was the situation back then in the 1950s? And he said, well, I've seen on television, your country in New Orleans, you had that Katrina hurricane situation. We had Katrina in the mountains year after year after year. That's what it was like here. So they decided to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and started the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. 55 years later, there's a network of over 120 integrated industrial and technological companies in Mondragon. They employ almost 100,000 people, over 85% of whom are worker owners in their system. So the workers actually own the companies, they're cooperatives. Last year, they produced over $20 billion, with a B, $billion of revenue for these companies. If you know anything about Spain, you know they've been incredibly harder hit than the United States by the financial collapse. We call it the Great Recession. They call it the crisis. The unemployment rate in Spain right now is over 25%. For those of you who are between 18 and 30, if you lived in Spain, over 50% of that age group is unemployed right now. But in the Basque Country, where the Mondragon corporations are, the cooperatives, it's below 9%. And one of the reasons for that is they don't believe in protecting their capital by just laying people off and throwing them out of work. The way they work is if a company gets in trouble, everybody gets together and democratically decides, what are we going to do? Right now, a lot of people are working only 3/4 time and being paid only 3/4 in wages so that everybody else could stay working. Other cooperatives, there might be a solar cooperative, might be doing better than the manufacturing co-op that's making, dishwashers. So that better off co-op is going to absorb some of those other workers in because there's a sense of solidarity that we're all in this together. And so that is the Mondragon model. So now I'd like to talk about how we're trying to design something in Cleveland. And indeed, it's beginning in other cities out of the inspiration of what we've been able to do in early days in Cleveland, in Atlanta, in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, in Milwaukee, in Amarillo, Texas. Any of you from the Panhandle of Texas? In Amarillo, In a lot of other places, I flew in yesterday late because there was a delegation of 20 people from Minneapolis coming to Cleveland, try to figure this out, how they might do it. And so this is what we do. It's the Evergreen Cooperative Initiative. And I'm going to talk about very briefly and then show you a 6-minute video of the people of Evergreen, because that's really what's important. We have 3 goals. First of all, we're working in the inner city in Cleveland. Our target area is a very place-based strategy. Our target area has 43,000 residents. 40% live below the poverty line. The median household income is about $18,000. So the first thing we want to do is create jobs, because the unemployment level is incredibly high there. But second, one of our mantras is a job alone is not enough. We need to find a way to also enable people to build assets, to build their wealth. We don't think wealth is bad. We just think more people should have access to it. And the way that we're building wealth is we have created these companies as employee-owned firms. So if we all worked for the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry, which you'll see, all of us would be owners of that company. We would all contribute our labor to it. And if one year we had $100,000 of profits, there's a formula by which all of us get a piece of those profits and they go into an account that builds up over time. So that's the wealth building aspect. And finally, we're trying to stabilize neighborhoods. We're trying to transform these neighborhoods which are very disinvested and turn them into world-class places to live. I'm going to skip a couple things, but we call this a community wealth building paradigm. And actually, Caroline, she had a couple slides that map this in different ways than what you're about to see. But very basically, this is our approach to the economy, and not necessarily the one that's the dominant economy at this time. We believe in promoting broader ownership over business. We think if it's a good thing to own business, more people should have a chance to do that. And just because you're low income or just because you're doing manual labor, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a right to own a piece of the action. So we're interested in broadening ownership. We're interested in anchoring businesses so they don't leave our communities. Cleveland, Ohio, at one point had more Fortune 500 corporations based in that city than any city in America except New York City. Today there's a handful. They've almost all gone. There's a history of many of our cities. We actually throw away our cities and our infrastructure. Companies come and go, the whole thing starts to collapse. So we want to anchor businesses in place so that these businesses can be there in 10, 20, 30 years as they are in Mondragon. We want to stop money leaking out of our communities. One fact, in Northeast Ohio, residents there pay for $8 billion with a B, $8 billion of food every year. Of that $8 billion, less than $300 million of that food is actually grown in Northeast Ohio. If you want lettuce in Northeast Ohio, it's coming 2,000 miles from California and Arizona, 2,000 miles of transportation and carbon bringing that lettuce there. And all that money is just being sucked out of the community. You're getting no multiplier effect. People aren't using it to exchange, to get their hair cut or go to a restaurant and employ more people. So we want to stop money from leaking out of the community. And those are other principles that are behind this. And this, Caroline, is kind of, yours is round. It's a man-woman thing or something. Ours is straight. But these are a lot of the same things that Caroline had on her chart. So the thing I want to let you know is while we're working in this third column where it says ESOPs or worker cooperatives, there are all these different mechanisms that exist that help reinforce these values that I was just talking about. And if we were meeting in 1970, 40 years ago, almost nothing on this chart would have existed. There's been this incredible buildup of experimentation and modeling, and yes, failure and mistakes, but the growth of these areas right below the surface of what we know as the economy and what you see on the evening news or what you read in the newspaper. It's a little known fact that there are now 10,000 companies in America that are owned in part or whole by their employees. Some of them are worker co-ops, most of them are ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. More than 11 million people work in the United States, the home of free enterprise. More than 11 million people work in employee-owned companies. That's more people than are members of private sector unions now. That's how radically things are changing in our country. So there's all kinds of mechanisms that can be used. We've started in Cleveland 3 companies. We just began this. Our first company's opened in 2009, so we're just beginning. The first, you'll see pictures of all these, the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry. Those two gentlemen, Keith Parkham and Medrick Addison, both were they were the first two people hired. They actually run the facility pretty much these days. There are 25 worker owners now in that company, of whom 23 have felony criminal records, but they've been extraordinary employees because we're willing to hire people that have had that barrier to employment. We do 10 to 12 million pounds of healthcare bed linen and hotel bed linen, so it's a big plant, big facility, and it's the greenest commercial laundry in Northeast Ohio, and maybe all of Ohio. It's in a LEED Gold building. We use 1/5 the water of our competitors and the like. Second is Evergreen Energy Solutions, does big solar arrays. We've done about 650 kilowatts to date. By the end of the year, we're about to start our biggest project yet, 750 kilowatts, so close to a megawatt of installed solar. That company, again, 20-some employees, owned by the people who work there, based in our community, producing green energy. It also does weatherization and other things. And this company, Green City Growers, is my favorite. It's just completed construction. It will be producing in downtown Cleveland, right? So right in the heart of Cleveland, we've built a 4-acre hydroponic year-round food production greenhouse. It's the largest such facility in any core urban area in the country. We'll produce 3 million heads of lettuce and 300,000 pounds of herbs like basil on a yearly basis. Again, there'll be 45-some employees. They'll be the owners of this facility. So that's what we're doing. I mentioned lots of businesses have left Cleveland, but what we have behind, and it's what Buffalo has behind, and Detroit, and lots of other communities, is what are called anchor institutions. Some people call them eds and meds. Universities, hospitals, they tend to be big. They're the largest employers. They're often nonprofit. And so we work with those institutions because they can't get up and leave. You know, Case Western Reserve University has been in Cleveland for over 100 years, and it is not moving to Albuquerque. Now, companies may move to Albuquerque, but Case Western's there. They are locked in place. So they have some self-interest in making sure there's a community that's healthier and so forth. Well, if you take the 3 biggest anchors in Cleveland, which are that university, Case Western Reserve, university hospitals, and the Cleveland Clinic, those 3 institutions together purchase over $3 billion of goods and services every year. But until we started this project, there was very little consideration given to, well, can we deploy that money? Can we buy those goods and services in a way that really benefits the community? Because look, we're surrounded by this sea of poverty and unemployment and disinvestment, and it's not safe. How can we conduct our business in a way that will be better for everyone? And so we're looking for local purchasing opportunities. You do laundry. We can build a laundry here. I'm also working in Amarillo. For those of you from Albuquerque, one of the hospitals in Amarillo doesn't do its laundry in Amarillo. It drives it 250 miles every day one way to come to Albuquerque. Now, there's so much about that that doesn't make sense. I mean, we don't have time to go through that. So we want to purchase locally. Then we're starting new community-based cooperative businesses, hiring locally, giving people a shot to get into the economy. We want to be green. We want our businesses to be the greenest in our sector in comparison to competitors. We don't want to take jobs away from somebody in the suburbs of Cleveland and throw them out of work and move the jobs into the inner city. We want to actually add jobs. So we look for where's the economy expanding. Maybe it's not manufacturing anymore, but maybe it's green energy. Maybe it's local food, so we could put more people to work. And we want to move to some area of scale. What we're trying to look at is how do we create several thousand jobs over the next 10 years through this strategy. So with that, I may need you, a wise one. So this is a 6-minute video. And what you're going to see are Evergreen worker owners and some of the anchor institution partners saying like that.
We're building this new businesses first.
And can we get back? I'm pretty sure it's not damaged.
And this really is just the beginning. And it's a great model. You know, this is a real deal. And you can see the guys over here and the ladies that are going to own this company. And what an incredible opportunity.
It is really a great day
traditionally in economic development in this country, what we do is we train people for jobs. And then at the end of that pipeline, there may not be a job there. Evergreen stands that model on its head. We're building the green businesses first. We know what the 50 jobs will be, and then we recruit people into those positions.
You know, you have to grow. You nurture. You are instrumental in what it becomes. And that's the difference between working at Evergreen and somewhere else.
I am a owner versus just a worker. I help make decisions in the company.
You're hired as a probationary or temporary worker for 6 to 12 months. During that time, you prove yourself. You show up, and you're a team player. You buy into the Evergreen concept and mission.
The members who are already a part of the co-op vote democratically on whether or not you get in.
If they vote you in, then you become a member of the co-op. You're either going to get a raise, you start buying a share in the co-op, and then each year that there are profits in the company, you're divided into accounts or called capital accounts that each worker has. And that's an asset that each worker builds up over time instead of earnings.
We have a stake in the business, but we also are part of the decision-making process.
Putting actual wealth building material into the hands of people who normally not have that opportunity. It's making them their own CEO.
Everything was really inspired by something that's taking place not in this country, but overseas.
What we learned about both Mondragon and Spain is really how they took a model from over 50 years ago and made it so successful that it's transformed the whole region.
People with skill sets reside in these areas. We're building it, we're growing it, we're growing the businesses in targeted zones.
The anchor institutions in Grand University Circle do about $3 billion a year in procurement.
The Cleveland Clinic is really very excited about what Evergreen Cooperative Initiative entails. There is so much that is good for the city of Cleveland, and the combination of the very institutions that are here to stay, working with these new cooperatives that are creating not only jobs but wealth for our community.
Everything we do to consume, to run these businesses here, operations. If we can do that in a way that's better for the local environment and the community that lives in that environment, that's a real positive for us.
We feed an awful lot of people on campus every day, and we think that the idea of being able to use products that are grown locally very close by, it also has a great environmental benefit of reducing the carbon footprint from the transportation of those goods across long distances. And we think it's good for the community to have that business right here in town.
It's a terrific formula, and we ought to make sure that we get this every opportunity to do it. But here we are, ready to break ground for our third cooperative, and if that's not a call to celebrate, we don't know what it is.
He will turn vacant land into productive use and provide good jobs for Cleveland, and it will provide for our healthy and affordable locally grown food. As we move ahead and look at our economy and where it's going, we want to be in the forefront of it. And this project helps us do that.
Green City Growers is a 3.8-acre greenhouse, hydroponic, leafy greens, will grow lettuces and herbs, and it's in the heart of Cleveland. And it's the third of the Evergreen companies. It will provide employment as well for growers.
The fruits of Evergreen is bright, and maybe we can see more Evergreens, not only here.
I think what it does is open up the imagination for the country to think about how to do things differently in our urban core.
I see Evergreen having the exact same impact in the future in that it becomes part of the vocabulary, not just a great university circle.
Leadership. And that leadership has been furnished by the Cleveland Foundation, by the city, and by the leadership of the anchor institutions.
I think that everybody should get into the whole cooperative. Maybe in due time, once I get a little older and get more experience until the start of co-op day, maybe I can start another co-op, doing something else in Ohio.
it allows me to dream again. Things I put on hold and things I just threw back my mind and thought I can hold in, it's brought that back to the forefront.
Dream wants to be where the world is going after the world is.
John was a dear friend who was one of the most important figures in employee ownership in the United States and died very, very suddenly in 2009. The last word I'd like to say is you saw Medrick Addison, this sort of big guy who said, "Allow me to dream again." So I said a couple days ago, "Medrick, I'm coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Is there anything you want me to say to folks?" And he looked at me with a big smile and he said, "Tell them owning your own job is a beautiful thing." Thank you.
So I'd like to invite our speakers to come up for a Q&A session. And since it's a big audience in a big room, I'm just going to run around with the microphone unless you have a really strong voice and want to scream out loud. So yeah, if you have questions.
Seems to be working.
Testing. Yes.
She's running.
So, a quick question for Ted. How do you actually fund the construction of the buildings in which the laundry, the hydroponic plants, and so on are taking place? Where's that money coming from?
So, of course, finding money to do business development in inner city is always very, very challenging. We created something called the Evergreen Cooperative Development Fund. That's a revolving loan fund. We've succeeded at getting about $5 million put into that fund, and then the fund loans it out to the companies. We've also had a lot of support from the administration. There's something called a HUD 108 loan that's it's a loan. It has to be repaid back, but it's 20-year money at about 2 or 2.5% interest, which really helps. And then there's this very odd thing called New Markets Tax Credits, which it'll give you brain damage to work with them, but it's a good way to get money into these kinds of communities. So it's a whole set of different kinds of financial tools we use.
Yes, good morning. My name is Eduardo Bairo. I am a scientist in Mexico, working on different applications of high technology like robotics for medical application and so on. But I saw your talk and the lady there. I think it's a naive way to think. So what you are doing actually is fixing the contradictions of capitalism. Trying, you know, in an international forum have been criticized, this green movement, putting a cover, a green facade, but the interest and the aggressivity of capitalism is very bad. For a couple of days ago, died a very important leader in Spain, as Carrillo, who one sentence say, capitalism will destroy humanity. What you are doing are helping capitalism, because capitalism has much power, money, Pentagon, CIA, and so on, which you are nothing. You are helping them. So if you say in the last sentence, if you own your own business, you are doing well. But you are not talking the internal intrinsic contradiction, which you are an offer and a victim, and you will suffer ever. Mm-hmm. So it's a political matter. So if you apply scientific methods to understand history and economy, and contrast you think and plan economy, you go back to the classics, which you are trying to discover plusvalia like Marx. So you have to understand in a scientific way and plan us these activities, and which the lady very nice said, solidarity is a principle of communism. And the Bible are many sayings of communism. So you are trying to invent new things which have been done in the past. So we have to open our eyes, bring all the communists around the world, resist, but with a program, a scientific program, which has been said in the old classics. So for me, you are in a naive approach. Sorry about that.
I got it. Thank you. Let me just say, I don't agree, but I don't think we have time to do the whole thing. I think you've misinterpreted what we're attempting to do.
I can add something to that, being an anti-capitalist myself. You have to understand that in this land, capitalism has been something different as from the colonized outside, the victims of the peripheral Fordist approach. So in one way, I think that what they are doing is fixing their own place. And the way they do it is, it should be self-determined. I mean, as we are opposing colonization, we should also oppose to colonize their practices of healing. And what I think it's a common line in between these three presentations is that I mean, you are focusing on a past, on fixing a past, because this is a land that has jails that are full of people, and these people, there is a racial distinction in who is in the jail. They privatize the jail system. So actually, for some people, it's actually a business to put people in jail. It's a completely inhuman thing, and it marks the end of this system and the disappearance of the body. But still, they have to fix it in some way that is, you know, how they find it in their own way. I mean, the sensibility of many people here, the powerful 1%, is still that capitalism is a good thing. And I would let them go on with that and discover this history. What I wanted just to say is that what we have in common is, I think, on the past, the present, and a possible future, which is also flawed. I'm not saying Bitcoin is the solution, is that we are all trying to build an expertise on how to innovate under austerity. And this is something that we have in the Western world. In Europe and in US, we are imposed austerity. The IMF and the World Bank are imposing the same agenda that imposed on the rest of the world. And it will be a disaster, but we have to deal with austerity because no one of us is still in power to actually change this narrative and take a standing point and an institution that can stand in front of them and say, no, we are going to do it in a different way. So you're lucky, I would say, to have in front of you the possibility to build an alternative to capitalism.
We have a question over here.
Hi, this is also for Mr. Howard. It's maybe a question and then also a challenge. The question is, are the workers educated about economics and politics in this way? It seems they certainly have an idea about being the owner of their jobs and a sense of empowerment for that. And I guess the challenge is there a way that you might, or that Evergreen might encourage those workers to turn around and spend their dollars on products that are made locally? I guess what I see as a sort of paradox in the situation is that these workers earn maybe a slightly better wage than they could have otherwise, but then they're more than likely turning around and probably spending those dollars in Walmarts. So how do you fix that?
Yeah. So those are really good points. So what I can say is we spend an enormous amount of effort and are escalating it within the cooperatives on leadership development, training, education. And it runs everywhere from the nature of cooperative ownership and the difference between owning capital where you work and contributing your labor to it from the traditional corporations, all that. How to read a profit and loss statement because this is your company, so we have to have open book management. What is the role of a board of directors and governance? Because some of the people you saw sit on the boards of their companies, and that was a whole new process. We're going to be partnering with a woman at San Francisco State, a professor. His name is Raquel Pinderhughes, who has a really quite extraordinary program called Roots of Success that we're going to start to build into this. And it's a never-ending and open-ended educational process. And your point about making a kind of buy local mentality throughout the system is very good. And I suspect at this point, you're probably right. People are making decisions looking for whatever they think is the lowest priced product. But that's part, again, Mondragon as this 50-year effort, they even have a university, with 4,000 students. It's an ongoing education and culture building effort. And then ultimately, it's not in a partisan sense, but it is a kind of political effort, because it is about who gets to control the fate of the community and where it's going.
We have a question over here.
Yes, I was just curious if any of the three of you could talk just for a second about a couple of days ago, the city of Bristol in England started their own currency. I was in Totnes when they started theirs, but that's a village. This is an entire city, and I just wondered if any of you could address that.
Briefly, one of the websites that was up there, dindy.net, is an observatory on complementary currencies. This is the main project that got me into this Bitcoin product. It's run by two people, me and Marco Sasci. Some people are joining, and we are investing some of the knowledge that we gather with our PhDs. Marco is studying in Leicester, and we already had a cooperation with the Social Trade Organization, and we are trying to map and also understand where it leads this very natural way of self-determining their sovereign, I will use again this word, and organize the economy of many transition town movements. You have Let's, US pounds, in Bristol now the currency. Also in Spain there are many currencies born. In Brazil there is Banco Palmas. In Italy we have Archipelago Czech. There are several complementary currencies. The interesting thing is that they all have different characteristics, and it opens up the possibility to actually, for what we call currency architecture. You can think of being also medium, can become an architecture in which people moves in and take their decisions. So it's extremely interesting. Thank you for mentioning that there are many initiatives, grassroots, even more grassroots than Bitcoin. So, sorry, I'm taking a lot of time in answering this, but still, Bitcoin, you can see it as the currency of the hacker community. And I'm not sure if it will fit every community. And within the community of Bitcoin, my polemic was that we should be working on a framework to generate currencies rather than, and engineer currencies, rather than create one. But it's being a lot of fun to run one right